The capture of the Madeleine, the ship on its way to Gaza, came one day away from the anniversary of the USS Liberty attack. A case of mistaken identity, apparently, when a US ship was downed by Israeli firepower. Or was it a false flag attack to draw the US into the 6 Days War? I know what the survivors think, but could there ever be a false flag attack like that in the UK? According to what you're about to hear, there has already been one.
Cases of false flag terrorism, and these were the cases that made my ex-partner and I quit and decide to go public and blow the whistle on MI5. And the first one was the bombing of the Israeli embassy in London in 1994.
Would a country really bomb its own embassy?
Now, in this case, 2 Palestinian students were arrested, and they were tried and convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison each for conspiring to cause this explosion. And yet MI5 had information that Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, had actually bombed its own embassy. And it had done that for 2 reasons. One was to increase security around all the Israeli assets in London. They were always hassling for it, and MI5 was always saying, no, there's not a threat. But they also wanted to shatter a Palestinian political support network, which was operating in London at the time, and which these 2 students belonged to. And the lead investigator in MI5, whose code number was, his sort of James Bond number was G91, had seen all the evidence and all the intelligence, and he made that official assessment that Mossad had done this.
Now, I remember this vaguely. This is, we're talking 14 years ago.
It's a long time
ago. But it was
yeah.
huge at the time. I mean, it was a huge worldwide story.
Yeah. In fact, there'd been an earlier attack against some Jewish interest section in Buenos Aires earlier that year as well. Similar sort of MO, modus operandi, with a car bomb driven and parked outside that exploded.
So in 1994, a car bomb explodes outside the Israeli embassy in London.
In London, yeah.
Anyone hurt or killed? I don't remember.
Very minor injuries, that was all. Okay. Nobody was killed. And it was a very sophisticated device. It appeared to eat itself, eat all the forensics. Now, this is very, very rare. Even the IRA, which is a very sophisticated terrorist organisation, could not make bombs that effective. So it looked like a, sort of fairly technical person had put that together. But what emerged from that, the senior MI5 officer, who was in charge of the investigation into it, and had seen all the evidence, but also all the intelligence, which isn't necessarily admissible in court, wrote his formal assessment at the end of the case. And he said he reckoned that Mossad, the Israeli External Intelligence Agency, had bombed their own embassy. A sort of controlled explosion outside the embassy. And as I said, that was a senior MI5 officer. That was his formal verdict. If you read that on the internet now, you would say that sounds like some mad conspiracy theory. But it wasn't. This was the official position of MI5. And he said that they did it for 2 reasons. One, they were always hassling MI5 for increased security around their embassy and other interests in London. Because, of course, London had a reputation of giving safe haven to Arab dissidents from around the world at that point. And MI5 kept saying, well, there's no reason to increase the threat assessment. You don't need extra protection. So letting off a controlled explosion outside, of course, they immediately got what they wanted there. But crucially, 2 innocent Palestinians were arrested, charged and convicted of conspiracy to cause that attack. And they were very active in a Palestinian support network in London, political campaigning for the people on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And they were gaining some traction in the media. They were getting quite a lot of support. So by arresting these people and framing them for an attack and sticking them in prison, the whole network just shattered and hasn't got back on its feet to this day. So that would be a clear political advantage for Mossad to have achieved in London by framing these innocent people for an attack which was carried out by Mossad.
Where are these 2 people now?
They're still rotting in prison.
So they've been in prison for 14 years.
Yeah, and they both got 20-year sentences. They both proclaim their innocence. They will serve the whole sentence. And it was a young woman called Samar Alami, who's had a breakdown since this case, for obvious reasons, and a young man called Jawed Botme. And
they were found guilty of
conspiring to cause the attack. Not actually doing it. They had cast iron alibis. But the linkage was a mysterious figure who was known as Raider Maghrabi. And he was a man, apparently Middle Eastern, who befriended many people within this Palestinian support network. And Jawed Botme knew a little bit about second-hand cars. So Raider Maghrabi asked him to go along to an auction and help him buy a second-hand car. So Jawed did. This was the car that was used in the explosion. This was the linkage that pulled these Palestinians into the case. And of course, during the investigation, Raider Maghrabi just disappeared. So the speculation would be that actually this guy was the Mossad person.
This is getting ridiculous. There's no way that an Israeli would be able to pose as an Arab and convince people that that was his genuine identity. They would never get away with that.
In the UK, we have a law called the Official Secrets Act. So if you ever talk to anyone ever about what you saw when you were working there, you go to prison, not the people who conspired to commit murder. So we left and we went on the run, and we ended up living in exile for 3 years because we decided to report the crimes of the spies. And I was arrested, family members were arrested, friends, supporters, journalists. Some were arrested, some were even convicted for trying to help us in this process. And of course, David Shayler went to prison not once but twice for blowing the whistle on murder on the part of MI6. So I just raised that because, of course, the issue of false flag is a historic reality.
Reality or insanity? What do you make of these far-fetched conspiracy theories? But don't forget, the terrorists who bombed the King David Hotel in Jerusalem entered the building dressed as Arabs. Let me know what you think in the comments, and as ever, thank you for watching.